Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Send Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host Bryan and Peter today, and we're joined by a very special guest. Backed by popular demand, it's Dr. David Evans, the equine sports scientist. And last podcast was well received, and this one's going to really go deep diving into young horses in training. It's a little bit controversial, and the impact it has on the young horse's anatomical structures, including the tendons, ligaments, and joints, that phenomenon called shin soreness, and is this good or bad? And we'll look at, is it better to start that young horse at a earlier age or a later age, and the impact on its structure and also the performance. So how are you, David?
Very well, Bryan, and hopefully you in the same good state.
Yeah, we're coping in Queensland all right. How are you, Peter?
Yeah, things are good for us. Obviously, things are heading in the right direction. We've obviously had a lot of requests to get David back onto the podcast after the first one that we did, and there was a few obviously people that David used to work with a while ago, and a couple of younger sort of performance trainers as well who were quite interested in all the information that we covered. So, a topic that's been probably a little bit controversial to a degree is sort of when to start training younger horses, and Bryan and David obviously will go over the study that David's going to sort of help us summarize today. But for us in general, is we've always sort of bumped our heads about, well, when's a good time to start exercising a horse? And your instinct sort of goes, well, like let them grow, let them mature, don't do anything until they get older. So we're going to sort of, I think, throw a cat amongst the pigeons here with what David will help us with. But Bryan, do you want to just reference the study that we're going to summarize today?
Yeah, so it's a literature review by Logan and Nielsen, and it's called Training Young Horses, the Science Behind the Benefits. And Dr. David Evans, he's found this study, and it's been published in 2021, so it's really the latest research, and he'll step us through the whole impact of training young horses, the impact it has on the anatomy, and give us some more information for us to take away when we do look at our young horses and see what methods we could use to start them. So we'll start off, David, by just asking you how you found this article.
I have an email service where each month I get a list of all the latest research papers on anything to do with horses. I focus, of course, on exercise science. So when this came through, it got my attention, partly because I'm doing some consulting work that potentially looks at the issue, a bunch of horses. After reading it, I thought, wow, this addresses a lot of issues, a lot of assumptions, beliefs, if you like. And so when I spoke with Peter about it, he thought it might be appropriate for a podcast. And I know, Peter, you'd had an inquiry about having a discussion on this topic, I think, as well.
Yeah, so on social media, it does get a bit of contention in terms of when you should start a young horse. And as we see those thoroughbred racehorses, their common retirement cause is limb injuries.
Yes, that's right. And just before I go on, I've just got to say that what I'm doing today is summarising a literature review. So I'm not really giving my beliefs, not trying to change anyone's opinion here, and I'm not giving veterinary advice about any health issue or training. I'm not giving any training advice. I'm just trying to summarise the research, and the research is not clear-cut on every issue. It's a bit like COVID virus research. We learn more as we do more research, and we change our understanding as time goes by. So yes, you're right that and my focus here is mostly on thoroughbreds because, as you said, Bryan, the so-called wastage in Australia, wastage of horses through injury, is a common issue for loss of horses due to injury, either a catastrophic injury or low-grade injuries that just means they have to be retired. And of course, that's not surprising. If we've got 400 to 550 kilogram horses galloping at 60 to 75 kilometres per hour, and sometimes on tracks that are altogether too hard for such exercise, it's not surprising that their limbs are subject to varying degrees of stress, and sometimes that stress is reflected into damage, which causes lameness.
I think, David, from my end, obviously we've been sort of running our business for about seven years now, and we sort of, we're not from a horse background, but we sort of learn as we've gone along pretty quickly with nutrition, obviously exercise science, working with yourself. And a question that I normally ask trainers when we sort of do a feed consult is sort of with the younger horses, if I ask them, well, like, why are you doing this work? And the common answer is, well, that's what we've done for the last 50 years or 60 years. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, so what this sort of, research paper actually goes into is, well, like you said, science is not concrete, but at least we've got some science behind why things are getting done this way, why things are working and why things are not working. Is that a sort of assumption?
Exactly right. And I guess there aren't many opportunities for trainers to get access to this sort of information. I've heard trainers say, well, when the veterinarian comes around, they're too busy to talk about the big picture issues. They're spraying the horse and treating it and moving on to the next one. So this is an opportunity this paper provides the opportunity to just look at where the research has got to. And mostly it is in thoroughbreds. And then the next question is about systems of training. And the first question might be, well, when we're talking about young horses, what do we mean? And the studies that have been performed around the world range from research on 6-month-old horses, believe it or not, up through yearlings and 2-year-old thoroughbreds. So there's a huge range of ages there. The preparation of horses that would be most relevant to people would be, what happens after the sales. In fact, what happens before the sales is important as well. But for most people, trainers and owners of interest in this area for their own animals they've just purchased, what now? And of course, normally they're put out for a while and not much is done for months. That might not be the best approach. Certainly, if I was buying horses at the sales, thoroughbreds and sales, I'd be looking for some way to do something with them immediately.
Yeah, David, with the information today, our listeners who some don't own thoroughbreds, they can use these general principles to apply to any horse that is in their competitive exercise competition and then make their own judgment on that data or the information we're going to talk about with the horse's anatomy?
Well, it's not quite any horse, Bryan, because, for example, endurance horses don't exercise at high speed. If you've got other sport horses, young sport horses that are going to be competing at high speeds, yes, those principles will apply.
Like polo horses too, David? Would they be sort of in that category?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Fantastic. Where would you like to kick this off, David? Obviously, with the summary that we're going to discuss today.
Yep. So I guess how about I just start with the issue: what type of research gets done in this area, and how do we know what we know, and how do we know what we don't know? So the evidence comes from doing two types of research. The first one is so-called epidemiology, and all this recent virus stuff with COVID, there's been plenty of talk about epidemiology. Epidemiology basically just means that the research goes out to horses that are in training with different maybe locations, different trainers on different tracks, and it just observes and records what each horse is doing over a period of time. It usually involves hundreds of horses. It has to involve hundreds of horses to then assess what are the risk factors for injury. And so the risk factors might be the number of times they go certain speeds, the total numbers of gallops distance-wise per month, and look at. Well, then the question is, well, which factors in the horses' lives during training were risky? The second type of study is an observational study of looking at the actual bits of the horse, the cartilage, ligaments, tendons, bones, and looking at them before and after training. And that helps us understand whether or not all those structures which support the horse during speed, do they respond to training? And then the question is, well, and the answer, to say, just to get this started, the answer is yes. Cartilage, ligaments, tendons and bones all respond to training. And that begs more questions, of course. Does the training method matter? Does the age of the horse matter? When we start trying to make these structures, which can break down and cause wastage, make them tougher and more resilient, so the horses are less likely to have to go out to the paddock. The focus on in these epidemiological studies, where we look at hundreds of horses, has been on issues like even the question of should we be racing 2-year-olds, and does the training method matter, and thirdly, even the article addresses the issue of using X-rays to assess whether or not a horse, a young thoroughbred racehorse, is ready for race training. So we'll start perhaps with the issue of should there be racing of 2-year-old thoroughbreds. You know, there's opinions about this, and it's not going away, regardless of opinions. But it's nice now to have some data, some research which informs the conversation. So what we found, what others have found, I haven't done. I've been involved in some of these epidemiological studies, but I'm talking about the sum of all this research and how it informs us. So the research has found that in general, 2-year-old horses are not at greater injury risk compared to older horses. In fact, the older horses were at greater risk of injury than younger horses, which seems counterintuitive, but that's what the research tells us. And as well in Australia, they looked at the age at the first race start and the risk of retirement. So the higher age at their first start increased the risk of retirement from racing. So again, that's counterintuitive. You'd think that leaving them longer to have their first start would decrease the risk of retirement, but it actually increased it. Now, so you might think, well, okay, why would someone not race them as 2-year-olds and leave it to have their first start as 3-year-olds? Well, it might be that someone just thought that was a good thing to do. The other perhaps complicating factor in that research was that trainers, owners, who didn't start their horses as 2-year-olds, those horses perhaps had some other problem, which meant that they delayed it. So it's not a perfect study because we don't know why there was that delay.
Would one of the factors be mental maturity?
Well, absolutely, that's right. It might be they had other medical problems, respiratory problems, behavioural problems that would have delayed the time to age at first start. So it's interesting. It contributes to our understanding a bit, but as you say, it could be other factors that were involved in delaying that time to first start. So that maybe they had a problem, and that caused their issues as 3-year-olds.
Well, the point there, David, is what I got out of it is that, you know, some trainers will go, well, no, you can't race them as 2, and then you get others go, well, you know, they have to be at 4. What this proves is that, yes, you can obviously do it at 2, but you need to look at all the other factors in terms of how is that horse? Is it mentally mature? Is it got any underlying health issues? That's
absolutely.
A fair analogy, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely right, because these large-scale epidemiological studies with hundreds of horses don't account for individual horses, which with their own individual quirks and problems. None of what I'm saying today relates to an individual horse, which might have many other factors that help a trainer and owner make a decision about what to do.
But at least we've put the myth to bed that, well, you know, yes, you can with your 2-year-olds if you have got the right horse, obviously, that ticks all the boxes. So that's one thing I think we can all agree on here.
Yeah, exactly.
And David, it's a real good crossover to what Peter and I and at SEN, what we do is we treat that horse as an individual. You don't make blanket assessments on their nutrition just because other people are doing it. You've got to look at their environment, training, and how they adapt. So then that's that crossover with that younger horse, how their environment, their training, and how they adapt in that. Also, importantly, with their mental maturity, as you said.
Absolutely right. And a lot of these epidemiological studies, I'm sure, have not taken into account different nutritional status of different groups of horses. There's only so much you can do in this, unless you've got 3 or 4 PhD students in the one study to look at absolutely everything in each horse's life.
David, I can just see our thoroughbred sort of listeners with their ears sort of getting pricked up here going, wow, beautiful. I've got this cracking 2-year-old and just can't wait to throw it into work. I've been sitting on a fence for the last 6 months and David goes, all guns blazing, let's go. It's a bit more to do with that, isn't it? So do you want to go into, obviously, the process, if you have got a horse that's ready, the process we need to take that horse through to make that sort of legging up, basically I call it process safer, where obviously the horse's welfare is obviously the priority.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, take it from the sales and think about sprinting it in 2 months. I would be exercising it after the sales, and I think a treadmill is perfect because everything's under control and most horses take to treadmills pretty easily. But the background information here is that a study found that when horses were exercised at high speeds, this is young horses, over short distance, had lower injury rates compared to horses which perform single long-distance high-speed exercise. So what I'm talking about here is time or distance that produces changes in tendons, ligaments, bone, cartilage. It's not lots of trot and canter. In fact, one study specifically of trot and canter in young horses showed there's no benefit for these structural parts of the horse, anatomy of the horse. You have to take the horse to speed, and that's a gradual process. So it takes me back to then, well, how gradual? Well, just from personal experience and looking at research studies at how to prepare a racehorse, you need to leg them up. But trot and canter is not doing much for the strength of the leg, but that has other effects on the horse. It improves their fitness for that sort of work. To actually get a response in the bone and so on, you need to introduce speed. And I would think probably, well, I've worked with trainers and done some training myself, so you might use 6 weeks of so-called pre-training and be ambitious about with your distance, but then it's time to start introducing speed work. And there's 2 types of speed work. This is the way I categorise it. There's speed work for muscle and the speed work for bones and tendons and so on. I think an important message here, that's 2 different types of training. The training for muscle, you can get training for muscle at less than maximal speeds. So if we're training at, say, 15 to the furlong, 15 to the 200, 14 to the 200, 13 and a half to the 200 metre, that sort of speed as the horse gets fitter and fitter, and depending on the quality of the horse, that will, if you did that over a minute or 90 seconds, that will train muscle. But as the horses, that won't, in a mature horse, be sufficient to prepare them for racing, prepare their bone for racing at 12s and 11s and 10 and a half per furlong. So you have to expose their legs to the speeds that they're going to get during the race. Those exposures need to be very brief. So no more than 600 metres would be my recommendation. So to answer your question about the structure of the program, Peter, it's a matter of mixing in, after those first sort of pre-training, mixing in muscle training, which might be, as I said, 15, 16, even 17 to the furlong, certainly no slower than that. And my contribution here is I look at heart rates, and if it's on a treadmill, we can do lactates and say, well, no, this is too slow. This is not training muscle, or it is, or you need to back off a bit. In terms of the speed work, you don't need heart rates, you don't need lactate measurements, you just need an assessment of where the horse is now, and say, okay, start with once a week, 400 metres at a speed that's higher than they're doing their muscle training at. So hopefully that makes sense. And then you might just do that once a week. And eventually, of course, those sprints will be at a 12-second 200 metre and faster. And so really the horse shouldn't go to the race until it's had probably a few weeks of exposures to those sort of sprints on top of their muscle training and slow work. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%, David. I think this is where the industry's going, and I'm sure these sort of biggest stables around the world and possibly some stables that you've worked with as well, they're getting into training like they are in human health. So let's just say, argument's sake, remember when you say Bolt was running, with his 100 meters and sort of 200 meters, I'm sure he was not going for a jog in the park and then for a walk. And, he would have been introduced to his sprint training. He would have had his stamina work. He would have had heart rates. He probably would have did blood lactates, probably had a balanced diet that was, to the gram in calories, fat, fiber, protein, you name it. So is this the way that you see training going in the future, where obviously they're getting consultants like yourself to monitor the training that they're doing, whether it's on treadmills, whether it's with, heart rates, blood lactates? Are we going that way into the future, or you think the industry is still stuck a little bit in its way where she'll be right, mate? Well, we've been doing this for 50 years and it's going to be okay.
Oh, no, I think things are changing. Yes, I get consulting work and so do other people. What's great now is there's a fantastic new technology. The heart rate meters are so much better. They're reliable and accurate. When I first started mucking around with heart rate meters in the late 1980s and 1990s, the equipment was awful. But there's several products around which make it easy, and increasingly, I know trainers are increasingly looking at technology to help them make decisions.
I think by consulting someone like yourself, you're not sort of flying blind. And I know obviously, when we do sort of diet analysis, obviously, like through our nutritionist, that everything's balanced. Obviously, you're seeking advice from professionals that are leads in their field. So this is sort of the service that obviously you're providing as well. So if you got any sort of trainer that that has a heart rate machine or that's just invested in a treadmill, they could probably work it out themselves over X amount of years. Well, this works, that doesn't work. But for me, it's a great way to fast track the process, working with a consultant that's spent 20, 30 years doing this already. And just to confirm what that trainer is seeing, feeling, with her own eyes. Yeah,
that's right. So I guess another topic that's of interest perhaps to some people is the use of x-rays. Fairly common recently. I don't know whether people are still doing this, but they could probably give up if they are and save themselves some money.
Well, I think they're rife through the thoroughbred industry, especially sales to overseas. They really rely on them.
The research suggests that perhaps they're not going to get a lot of information about readiness for fast gallops by x-raying their forelimbs, the growth plates in the horses. In fact, there's one study which showed that appropriate training, in other words, just structuring it as I've just tried to outline, we know that appropriate training before those radial so-called epiphyseal plates are closed can lead to lower incident rates of lameness, not a higher one. Now, that's only just one study that I know of, and one study doesn't make a truth. But it does beg the question: what's going on with all these X-rays?
Yeah, I think it's the jockey clubs that are demanding it, particularly overseas,
especially in Asia.
Yeah, for that sort of export market, but also for syndications and all these sort of compliance checks for investment into thoroughbreds.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they have to look at the latest research, what
we're talking about today.
Yeah, well, things don't change quickly. I think I read something where does it take 10 years or 20 years from new research in medical science to become general practice when you visit the doctor? Even if it's 10 years, that's a hell of a long time in medical science. Before research becomes knowledge in a general practice. So anyway, so it's something to consider. I wouldn't be bothered x-raying to see whether there was maturity or immaturity. There are epiphyseal growth plates, because this research informs me that, in fact, that if you train appropriately, you, in fact, have a lower incidence rate of lameness, not a higher one. And what's the point? The point here is, even in these immature horses, if the training is appropriate, the activity, the structure of all the activities are appropriate, the bone and joint health in 2-year-olds, regardless of their x-rays, increases. The bone and joint health. So what I mean by that is the bone, the cartilage, the ligaments, tendons respond to the training to protect them against injury.
It's like working out a muscle, David, at the gym. Us humans, like the more you work the muscle, obviously the stronger, the bigger it gets.
Yeah, that's right. It is exactly right. And bone does it. all these structures which support the horse at high speed, they all adapt to training. And one of the bottom line sentences here is the adaptations to training, the changes in response to exercise occur more quickly in young horses than in old horses. That's now the truth. We know that. There was one study even that looked at 6-month-old horses. I'm not suggesting anyone grab weanlings and start treadmill training them, but hey, it's been done, and they showed that tendon strength increased remarkably in those horses. It's much harder in an older horse to get those sort of changes. So that's probably a bottom line here, is don't be too frightened of training young horses.
Probably furthermore to that, David, is in the joint section, they said horses of 5 months of age and who were only maintained in a box stall with no exercise had stunted joint development?
Yes, that's right. Horses doing nothing, standing in a box, as you said, you're quoting that study which showed that in those very young horses, they went backwards. Yep. They got less strong in their legs, in the tissue of their legs. So if in doubt, get them out of the box, but just walking around a paddock is going to be better than standing in the box. Yep. There's another issue, of course, that needs to be addressed here, and that one of these epidemiological studies was done at the University of Sydney, and I was involved in this. Naomi Cogger was a PhD student, and now she's doing work around the world, and there's some issues related to racehorse health. We looked at hundreds of horses and asked this question again: what was risky in these Sydney horses in terms of risk factors in young racehorses? And the major problem that we found in Sydney was a sudden increase in the speed of their gallops. So they're going along, they've done all their pre-training, they've done half pace work, then they do a little bit of so-called three-quarter pace work at maybe 17s, 16s, 15s, and then they jump. There was they jump from 15s to 13s and 12s and 11s without enough time in between. So those sort of high but not highest speeds are very important. You've got to sort of, in terms of structuring it, and going back to your question, Pete, about how you structure training, that period of training where horses are exposed to increasing speeds between about 15 per 200 and 12 or 11, that's really important. And that's when these sort of responses to training in these structures are going to happen. They're not going to happen during the slow work. There will be some response at the three-quarter pace work, but just stick around with three-quarter pace work and then jump up to sprinting, 400, 600, and people want to know how fast the horse is. I understand that, but it's a risky thing to do, to jump it up quickly.
David, just following on from that, shin soreness, obviously it's a pretty big issue in the industry, and obviously a lot of young horses do go through that process. From your personal point of view, obviously let's not get into any studies or hypotheticals, sort of from your personal point of view, do you think personally that the step up from what you just said, from those sort of 14s, 15 seconds to the 11s and the 12s, do you think that's a big contributor to shin soreness? Yes.
I mean, that's what we found in Sydney. And it wasn't with all trainers, just some trainers, one in particular, was particularly good at producing these sort of shin soreness and fetlock sprain issues that the main, hazard for young thoroughbreds when they start as 2-year-olds getting ready for racing. And the damage can accumulate. It doesn't have to be, oh my God, you go into the box and the horse is sore. It can be a gradual process. So the damage can be sudden, yesterday's gallop, or the horse can accumulate so-called micro damage. If there's micro damage and then there's not enough period for repair, that accumulation of micro damage becomes more serious and can result in lameness. So that gets down to allowing horses to have a recovery period from these exposure to high-speed work. You can't, that's up to the trainer to work out, but I would think no more than obviously twice a week and maybe once a week to start off with.
So it's not a normal practice, obviously, for a horse to be going shin sore is what we'd like to to sort of put on record here?
I mean, I sympathise with trainers because it is hard to avoid. It depends on the quality of the track, the watering, and the maintenance of the track surface, the availability of good surfaces. And I also understand that trainers almost want shin soreness to happen, and then they can turn the horse out and say, okay, well, finally it's gone shin sore. We'll turn it out now and bring it back after Christmas or whenever, and it probably won't go shin sore again. And they're right, because there has been, by going shin sore, the bone has responded to that. It's got thicker and so more resistant next time it comes in to the stresses of training. But you don't have to get shin soreness to produce that thickening of the bone and resistance to injury. Shin soreness, and when we were doing the study, they said, oh, what are you studying shin soreness for? It's not a big deal. Well, it's a big deal if it happens just before the Golden Slipper or some other big race. That's a big deal. It can come at a bad time. So I guess then the other type of study is done, as well as looking at the large numbers of horses and what was risky in their life. The question then is, well, what actually happens in the bones, tendons, joint cartilage, and how does it change with training? So the bottom line from what we've just been saying is that the strain through the legs during galloping is like, as you said, Peter, like going to the gym and training your muscle. You can train all these structures. And there will be, if the stimulus is of sufficient intensity, there will be a little bit of micro damage. It's a bit like gym work and you've got muscle pain for a day or two. And that stimulates the repair process, and the repair process leads to a sort of an increase in the size of the tissue or some other microstructure, which leads to higher resistance to injury. So, as we said before, this can happen in older horses, but it occurs much more quickly in younger horses. While they're still growing, there's 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. Leaving it to 4-year-olds would be well, no one does it anyway, but it would be the wrong thing to do.
So how, David, so let's just say there's some listeners out there that just, don't do anything with a horse literally till they're 4 years old. They leave them in a paddock, let them, live the good life. They bring them in as soon as they turn 4. Just explain it sort of in in sort of layman's terms so our listeners can sort of comprehend it, the issues. Obviously, we're just starting that 4-year-old for its first sort of prep.
The research suggests that they're going to have a lot more problems with lameness. Because if you give that 4-year-old the same prep as you were giving a 2-year-old and 3-year-old, their tissues do not respond as well. Their tissues respond better when the horse is still growing. And so in the older horse, you might think that you're doing the right thing, leaving it to then, but in fact, you're not doing it any favours, because on average, the tissue is not going to respond as well. And so you're likely to increase your risk of injury. Now, you might not see that with 1 or 2 horses, but if you've got 100 horses, and we're talking big numbers, on average, because these studies are about averages, on average, leaving it till they're older will be associated with higher injury rates.
And David, would that be sort of tendons, ligaments, sort of like bones along those lines?
The whole lot. And even putting horses out for spells, mature horses out for spells, where they're not actually recovering from an injury, but that people just think, oh, well, look, it's been up for a while, let's turn it out for 3 months. These changes then regress. All the hard work in putting in good quality training and recovery sessions and training and recovery and then mixing in your racing, you just turn it out for 3 months to give it a holiday. All that work is going to be dissipated. Might not be lost completely, but we know that as you stop training, those adaptations which help resist lameness start to dissipate. And then in an older horse, you bring it back in, it's going to be harder to get back to where you were.
I know when I go on holidays, I get really unfit.
Especially you went for 3 months and you drank gin every day.
Yeah. What, you mean you don't jog on the beach and do push-ups all day?
I like to sit on the beach with a gin.
Yeah.
But it makes sense, though, doesn't it, David? Like if we put it into human terms, let's just say like we're really healthy, we eat healthy, we work out, we take care of our appearance, and we just go and let ourselves go for 3 months, just, sit on the couch, watch TV, eat junk food, drink, soft drink, we're going to blow out. And then if we try to start sprinting, day 91 out of 90 doing nothing, we're most likely going to cause ourselves some sort of injury pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the same is true in thoroughbred racehorses. You give them a rest for, let's go back to English racehorses. They're required to really stay up for the year or for 9 months, and then they might get a month off, 6 weeks off through Christmas, because everything's frozen anyway. And the trainers go to Jamaica for their holidays. They come back, and they're out thinking about starting them straight away. They don't give them long spells to recover from nothing. Just give them a break. They have to, because you can't. Everything's frozen. But if I had racehorses that I wouldn't be giving them spells for more than 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and even then. What's the problem if you want to break from racing? What's the problem? I would be putting it on a treadmill.
Do you suggest, like, even through that prep, it's better to just have that week let up in a paddock and then resume training, just for their mental health after a race, if it's suiting that horse, or if that horse need is identified, instead of those 4-week breaks?
Yes, that's right. I think a week, 2 at the max, for mental recovery if the horse is a bit off,
I've got a question from my end, David. So that horse, that example Bryan just said, if we tip that horse out for 2 weeks into a paddock, it does absolutely nothing. Do you think if we brought it back that Saturday and we wanted to race it again, would it lose much fitness over that 2-week period, or would it be able to race competitively being 2 weeks out?
It'll lose a lot of fitness. It will already be starting to detrain its structures, but we also know it's also lost its aerobic fitness very quickly. In 2 weeks, it goes down quite a lot. So I wouldn't put it in a paddock for 2 weeks and then race it.
Yep.
You'll have a horse a lot less fit, especially a stayer or a middle distance horse. That loss of aerobic fitness is definitely going to be a problem.
What would be the max time off without that loss? Would it lose it over 5 days?
Look, the research that's been done, and there haven't been many studies. They're not easy to do these sort of things. A lot of high-tech stuff, small numbers of horses. So my recollection is that in 2 weeks there was considerable loss. There was even a detectable loss after 7 days of aerobic fitness. Mm-hmm. So a week.
Yep.
A week you're starting to lose aerobic fitness. With a week off, I would probably want to give the horse a good week of training when it will not just come straight back to a race. Now there'll be people say, "Oh, well, we did that with a horse and fine. It went
and
well."
It won. So then it's okay for all horses. Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what I'm getting out of this, David, is, and just correct me if I'm sort of on the wrong path here, is with the gradual adaptation to training. This is obviously, where the study did, where if you adapt it gradually, you increase the speed, not distance at the same time. You either do, one or the other. It's like an athlete training. They're going to build muscle. So what you're saying is, with this extra work, they're actually building stronger bones. They're building stronger tendons. They're building stronger ligaments, which is new to us. So, I mean, I'm finding this fascinating, because I didn't think that you could build stronger bones, tendons, and ligaments through adaptation, but you've confirmed that. So it just shows you that the cardiovascular fitness obviously is one part, but then you've got the bones, tendons, ligaments on the other part. And correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think a lot of sort of trainers go wrong where they sort of increase that speed a little bit too quickly, because they think, oh, well, look, this horse is going too well. It's feeling really well. It's looking really well. Got to go quicker. It's just, it's doing it easy. Is it that resistance to sort of, well, let's just keep the handbrake still on. Let's not just let it down and go full throttle?
Look, I think there's probably different reasons why they want to move it on quickly. Maybe there's pressure from owners. It's horses can be feeling well working at 15s because they're not getting much hard work. They're just, especially if it's only twice a week, it's an easy life, quite frankly. And no wonder that a lot of them are, out of their skin a bit because they're not really getting much in the way of exercise that's taking the edge off them. And you really have to take the edge off a horse a bit. It's not overtraining. It's just what is termed in the human zone is overreaching. Just take them a little bit further, which makes them, they might even be off their food or a little bit tired for a couple of days. But that's good. Let them have a recovery from that and then moving on. And I think there's also a lot of pressure, especially if they're bred to have a bit of speed, to find out. We've got a barrier trial coming up. We can throw him in there or throw her in there and see how she goes. But dangerous if you haven't prepared even for barrier trial.
Well,
I think probably one way to think about this is imagine what you'd like the horse to be doing in 2 weeks. Well, start preparing for that now. You should be doing a little bit of what the horse is going to be expected to do in 2 weeks. So if you want the horse to do 400 metres at 12s in 2 weeks, well, do 100 or let's say a 200 at 12s once a week this week, twice a week next week, and then step up the distance. So it's a gradual creeping up on what's required in a barrier trial or it's the first race in the prep.
That's really well explained, David. In a nutshell, obviously, I think we've covered most of the topics in a study that you've gone over. In terms of a take-home message, obviously, look, I'd highly recommend that any of our listeners out there, trainers, sort of performance horse trainers, polo cross, please contact David. Obviously, it is a service that he does offer. So I find it, and I've worked with you, obviously, with Bryan for a lot of years now, and it's more the education for us that we've learned, obviously, along the years we've been working together. And I find it fascinating because it gives you an advantage over your competition where, you're not flying blind. You're not guessing, well, am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right? You're a phone call away or you're a text message away. Hey, look, I'm thinking of doing this. What's the science saying? Is the data there for the science? Is this going to work? Is it's not going to work? So I find the service that you offer is fascinating because it just stops the guesswork, and you don't want to be guessing when you're dealing with obviously these animals. Some of them are very expensive. We say on the podcast with Bryan is that the prevention's better than cure. Once you do that injury, you're sort of, you're chasing your tail, and it's a long, tedious process. So, in terms of summarising this, David, for our listeners, can you sort of summarize it in sort of 3 or 4 sentences, the take home message for the study in your own opinion?
Yeah, so this review of lots of studies emphasises the importance of training young horses, not being frightened of causing injury. So if the training program is structured appropriately for these young horses, where the target is high speed in 12 weeks, 14 weeks, there will be a benefit for the horse's resistance to injury as a 2-year-old and a long-term benefit as 3-year-olds and 6-year-olds if the horses are not giving long spells and then brought back straight into high-speed work after a short prep. That's the main take-home for me. And the other point about knowing what the horses are doing, you can buy now these technologies, and you don't have to guess or even take the jockey's feedback about what the horse actually did. It's on the computer. And you can see what the peak speeds were and how long it was sitting at various speeds. So you know exactly what's happening.
There's no Chinese whispers.
And you can work with your riders as well, David. So, if you've got the data there, if you've got a rider that's a bit off with their timing, you can give some constructive criticism and, go, hey, look, let's just back off 1 second or 2 seconds. So you're working with your team rather than butting heads against them.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I've found a lot of work riders they love having a look at what actually went on in the work.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we want to care for that animal in the best possible way, and to improve that training in terms of the timing, as you said, getting it right is really important for their whole structure, but also that cardiovascular fitness. So,
that's right.
Yeah, David, I think you might wrap that because we're coming up to the hour, and we're really grateful for your time today, and we really thank you for coming on and giving your expert insight to this pretty contentious topic. There's nothing else, Peter?
Bryan, I think David's pretty much nailed it all. We'll leave your contact details, David, in the show notes for any of our listeners that obviously would like to contact you. But look, we try to stay abreast, obviously, with cutting-edge science for nutrition and, working with special guests like David. Obviously, he's helping us what's happening in a field of training and sort of adaptation. So it's not just like a one size fits all. You can get your feed right, but if you don't have your training right, then you're still only 50% there. So what we try to do, along with with David and different guests, is educate our listeners, our consumers, anyone that wants to listen about the latest research. As Bryan mentioned, this is from 2021, so it doesn't get any more recent than what this is. And we thank David obviously for summarising it all. And look, it is an hour, so imagine trying to read through it yourself and comprehend it 3 or 4 times. So there's nothing else, David, you'd like to finish up on from your end?
Well, if someone wants to follow up, or they read the paper and say, well, it says this, but what does that mean? Just contact me via my LinkedIn site, and it's got my email there. I'm happy to just take inquiries as to that might help someone.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And even on our end, if we've got any trainers that need that nutrition advice to feed the tendons, ligaments, and that whole bone structure of a horse in a proper balanced way that's going to support the whole digestive and the whole physiology of the horse, you can easily get us at SenHQ or through our usual channels, the email on our website.
And we'll have David back on again, obviously, in the next sort of couple of weeks. Even I think in the new year, there's a few topics that we're just sort of going through to what we'll cover next. So for our listeners out there who really love the first one, I'm sure they're going to love this one. So David, their expectations are going to be really high for the third one, so you better get ready.
Oops.
Oops. No, it's really good to have a chat to you, David. And we're always, as Peter said, we're always fascinated with this latest research just to improve these amazing animals in the way that they can perform on the track and even in the other disciplines. So, we really thank you again.
David. Well, guys, I enjoyed it. It's part of taking research to the people who really, when people do research, it's for horse owners, it's for horse trainers, and it's for horse welfare. So if we just make a little bit of progress on some of those fronts today, that's great.
Fantastic, David. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. So we'll have another podcast to you very soon, everyone, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.